What's up, biology students? Mr. Holloway here. Today's video is an overview of photosynthesis and cellular respiration. I'll go into more depth on each of these reactions individually in some of my other videos, but today's video will provide some context as to why these two chemical reactions are so important to living organisms. All life on Earth is carbon-based, meaning that all our important biological molecules and structures are based largely on the element carbon. Photosynthesis and cellular respiration are both key steps in the global carbon cycle, which we see illustrated to us here in an extremely simplified fashion. Photosynthesis is how carbon, the element of life, enters the food chain. The carbon dioxide in the atmosphere would be completely useless to living organisms without photosynthesis to turn that inorganic carbon into organic carbohydrates. Cellular respiration is how living organisms transform the energy stored in these carbohydrates into forms that can be used to power the machinery of the cell. Cellular respiration produces carbon dioxide as a byproduct that living organisms excrete back into the atmosphere when we breathe. In the atmosphere, carbon dioxide not only produces the greenhouse effect that maintains Earth's temperature range, but can also be used again by primary producers in order to produce carbohydrates via photosynthesis. In plants, photosynthesis is carried out in the chloroplast of the cell. Here we can see the internal structure of a chloroplast. Chloroplasts have a double membrane, depicted here as an outer membrane and an inner membrane. The space between these two membranes is called the intermembrane space. The inner membrane contains numerous infoldings that are arranged into these coin-shaped structures called thylakoids. Each stack of thylakoids is called a granum, and the fluid-filled space in between these stacks is called the stroma. Photosynthesis takes place partly in the thylakoids and partly in the stroma of the chloroplast. The thylakoid membrane contains green pigments called chlorophylls, and these chlorophylls absorb sunlight, harnessing this source of energy in order to power the process of photosynthesis. Despite the fact that they are green in color, chlorophyll pigments absorb blue light and orange to red light the best. Actually, chlorophyll looks green because it reflects green light rather than absorbing it. Cellular respiration occurs in mitochondria, which are contained within cells of all eukaryotes, plants, animals, fungi, even single-cell eukaryotes like paramecium. Like chloroplasts, mitochondria are surrounded by a double membrane, and also like chloroplasts, the inner membrane is highly folded, although the shape of these folds differs pretty greatly. In mitochondria, these infoldings are called cristae, and the fluid-filled space in the center of the mitochondria is called the matrix. It is in the matrix and in the cristae of the mitochondria where cellular respiration occurs. In order to conduct photosynthesis, chloroplasts use water and carbon dioxide gas, and these reactants provide the raw materials necessary for building carbohydrates. The energy to build these carbohydrates comes from the sun, and the sun's energy is transformed and stored in molecules of glucose, a simple carbohydrate monomer, or monosaccharide. Oxygen gas is produced as well, which is, of course, the stuff that we breathe. And we need to breathe oxygen because oxygen gas, along with carbohydrate monomers like glucose, provide the raw material for cellular respiration to occur. During cellular respiration, carbohydrates are broken down into carbon dioxide and water, and in the process, the energy that was stored in the chemical bonds of glucose is transformed once again, this time into a form that can be used directly by living cells. This form of energy is carried by a molecule called ATP, which has high potential energy, or high potential to generate movement and to do work. Water and carbon dioxide are the reactants of photosynthesis, and for every 6 molecules of water and 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, a chloroplast is able to produce 6 molecules of oxygen gas and 1 molecule of energy-rich glucose, which has the chemical formula C6H12O6, for 6 atoms of carbon, 12 atoms of hydrogen, and 6 atoms of oxygen. Glucose is a carbohydrate, and carbohydrates are food, so photosynthetic organisms are referred to as producers because they are able to produce their own internal source of food. Photosynthesis is an endothermic reaction, meaning that this reaction absorbs energy from the environment. This also means that the products of this reaction are more energetic than the reactants, because the energy that was absorbed is stored in the chemical bonds that hold these molecules together. This energy comes from the sun, and without the sun's energy to catalyze this reaction, photosynthesis would not occur. Photosynthesis occurs in 2 stages, the light-dependent reactions and the light-independent reactions, which are also referred to as the Calvin cycle. During the light-dependent reaction, light is absorbed by pigments in the thylakoid of the chloroplast. Water molecules enter during the light-dependent reaction, and this is also where oxygen gas is produced. A couple of important intermediate molecules are produced as well, including a small amount of ATP and a molecule called NADPH, which is like ATP in that it carries a form of energy that can be used later in photosynthesis. The light-independent reactions occur in the stroma of the chloroplast and do not require sunlight. This part of photosynthesis is powered by the ATP and NADPH produced during the light-dependent reactions earlier on. The energy carried by these molecules is used to convert carbon dioxide into organic carbon, like sugars. ADP and NADP+, the low-energy forms of ATP and NADPH respectively, are cycled back to the beginning where they can be charged up again with more sunlight. Glucose and oxygen gas, the products of photosynthesis, are also the reactants of cellular respiration, and for every molecule of glucose that goes in, 6 molecules of water and 6 molecules of carbon dioxide are produced. When we breathe in, we are inhaling the oxygen gas necessary for cellular respiration, and when we breathe out carbon dioxide and water vapor, the products of cellular respiration. Cellular respiration also releases energy, which means that this is an exothermic reaction. Another way to say this is to say that the products of cellular respiration are less energetic than the reactants. But the difference in energy doesn't just disappear. It is simply transformed into another form, in this case, the molecule ATP. Cellular respiration occurs in 3 stages: glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. Each of these stages produces some ATP, but most of the ATP produced during cellular respiration is produced during electron transport. And this is the part of cellular respiration that requires oxygen and is where water is produced. Glycolysis does not require oxygen and actually happens outside the mitochondria in the cytoplasm of the cell. During glycolysis, a molecule of glucose is broken down into 2 molecules of pyruvic acid, which results in a net gain of 2 ATP molecules as well. The Krebs cycle occurs in the matrix of the mitochondria and also results in a net gain of 2 ATP molecules. CO2, or carbon dioxide, is also produced during this stage. These arrows represent a few intermediate products, energy-carrying molecules called NADH and FADH2. These energy-carrying molecules power the electron transport chain, which is where the vast majority of ATP is produced. In total, 36 molecules of ATP are produced for every 1 molecule of glucose metabolized during cellular respiration. 2 during glycolysis, 2 during the Krebs cycle, and 32 during the electron transport chain. The ATP produced by cellular respiration is used for many different things. For example, transporting molecules into and out of our cells against a concentration gradient requires energy. That energy is provided by ATP, as we can see in this figure. ATP is also used to power the process of protein synthesis. Proteins do many important jobs inside our cells, and ATP provides the energy the cells need in order to build these proteins. ATP also provides the energy necessary for DNA replication, which must occur each and every time our cells divide in order to ensure that the new cells produced have a full and complete set of DNA. Additionally, ATP provides the energy necessary for muscle contractions and for muscle movement as a result. In fact, muscle cells have more mitochondria inside of them than almost any other cell in the body, and that helps to ensure that our muscles will always have an adequate supply of energy. And perhaps most importantly, ATP powers our brain and nervous system and helps our neurons to send electrical impulses around the body. In addition to these few examples, there are countless other uses of ATP inside the cells of living organisms, and cellular respiration is the process that produces all that ATP. Here we can see these two chemical reactions summarized for us side by side. You should notice some striking similarities between these two reactions. Essentially, they are opposite but complementary processes. The products of photosynthesis are the reactants of cellular respiration, and the products of cellular respiration are the reactants of photosynthesis. This means that the molecules synthesized during photosynthesis are exactly the molecules you need in order to conduct cellular respiration. And the molecules created during cellular respiration are exactly the ones you need in order to conduct photosynthesis. One reaction packages the sun's energy into carbohydrates, and the other releases this energy from carbohydrates so that it can be used by living cells. Looking at these two reactions in this format helps to illustrate how both matter and energy are conserved during these two reactions as well. Because if we count up all the C's, H's, and O's on one side of the arrow, and compare this to the number of C's, H's, and O's on the other side of the arrow, we should find them to be exactly the same, meaning that matter was conserved. The only difference is that these atoms have been rearranged to form new substances. We can also see that energy was absorbed during one reaction and released during the other, meaning that energy is conserved as well. These two sets of chemical reactions support the vast majority of living organisms on our planet, and each plays a key role in the carbon cycle as well. And with that, I will bring our video to a close. Thanks for watching, everyone.